A serious situation here. I'm down to my last 6 pints of pickled dilly beans, my last 4 pints of smaller dill pickles, and the last 3 full quarts of larger dill pickles. It's time to grab some of the canning supplies, get them upstairs, get some of the fresh cucumbers we've picked gathered together, and make some more pickles. Let's get started. After several days of sunshine, nice temperatures, and low humidity, we finally have again a rain day. It's a cool enough day, perfect day to make some pickles. Canning and pickling, if done correctly, are a very safe way to preserve a lot of different kinds of foods, vegetables, and even in some cases meat. I have canned venison at different times. You don't need to put things in the freezer then. You don't have the electricity. It'll store for a long time. I know when I was a kid, we had shelves in the basement full of canned goods to carry us through the winter. And coming from a German heritage, a lot of it was pickled. Everything is better pickled. Germans use vinegar to marinate meats, to tenderize them. They use pickling to help preserve foods. And of course, everybody loves dill pickles, and that's what we're going to work on today, is making dill pickles. I make dill pickles using a recipe that I have concocted from a variety of sources. Mom's old recipe, things I've pulled off the internet, and I have sort of a hybrid recipe that I'm going to go through today for what to add when making the pickles. But one of the basic ingredients is always going to be having some dill. I have a lot of dill growing out in the garden. Some of it's ready, some of it's not yet, so I went and bought some dill from some of our Amish neighbors that have produce available for sale. I like to put a little bit of red onion in every jar, and some garlic, and just a slight touch of red pepper flakes. Of course, you're going to need things like canning lids, and be sure you get the right size because there are different sizes available. I'm using standard jars, ball and cur. They take a standard ball or cur lid, and of course the rings to hold the lid on during the sealing process. You need a grabber to pick the jars up out of the hot water while you're doing the processing, or to set them into the water bath. You need hot water bath canning kettles. This one is for pints. This large one is for quarts that we're going to be doing today. And some pickling salt. I always have pickling salt on hand. So between the salt and the vinegar, when you make up that brine solution, that's what helps preserve the pickles and make them crisp. I'll be listing all of these items in the description so you can go back and take a look at it. Follow along with me and see how it's done. Of course, we're going to need jars to can these pickles, so one of the first things I'm going to do so they're ready to go is put a dozen jars in the dishwasher and run them on a hot cycle to make sure they are clean and bacteria free, because that's essential when you're doing canning. And I want to start it now so they've got time to wash a full complete cycle and dry off a little bit, but still be hot, because you want hot jars when you do the pickling process. So let's get a wash cycle of jars going, and we'll go on to the other steps. The cucumbers that I will be pickling today have been picked over a number of days and stored in the refrigerator, and as such, some have become a little dehydrated because these modern refrigerators take the moisture out of the refrigerator. So I have them soaking overnight in just plain fresh water. I don't use a pre-brining process like some people do, but putting them in water like this will help rehydrate them and make them a little crunchier when it comes time to cut them up and put them in the jars. I'll be heating this with a medium flame with the top on, just slowly bring it to a boil so it's ready to go. We're going to make the brine by putting 12 cups of hot water in this Dutch oven. 8-cup measure, so 8 cups and 4 cups make 12. Now we put 2 cups of just plain white vinegar. We have 14 cups of liquid. Now 2 1/3 cup measures of canning salt. We'll mix that together, bring it to a boil, and then let it cool down a little bit, but still use it while it's hot to do the pickling. I have seen some recipes call for putting sugar in with this. I don't like to use sugar any more than I have to in much of anything. And even when I have to use sugar in a recipe, I try to use about half of what it calls for. I see no point putting sugar in with dill pickles. Then you can throw in bay leaves. Sometimes it calls for that. I don't need that extra flavor in the brine water because I'm putting so many other spices into the pickles in the jar. So let's get this on the stove and get it heated up. And I always put the cover on a kettle like this when I'm heating it. Holds the heat in, helps it boil sooner. Another thing I always like to do whenever I'm cooking, baking, doing things like this is keep a sink full of hot, soapy water on hand, so as I'm going and using different things, I can keep them washed as I'm going. Sometimes I have to reuse them for something else. Sometimes I'm just done with them, and this makes sure they are clean and ready or just out of the way. I'm going to get my onion and garlic ready to go. Most of the time when I make a dish, I mince up the onions, and there is a technique for doing that, which I'm surprised a lot of people don't know. They make it very hard for themselves mincing up onions. I don't need minced onions this time. I'm just going to put a couple little pieces of slices in. So we're going to slice this onion into rings. And I like red onion because they're a little more pungent. They give you a little more flavor when you pickle them like that. And just cut those rings in half, and I'll divide those up between the jars when I get ready to start putting the pickles in there. Anything that I don't need, I will just mince that up and put it in a Ziploc bag. I have one sitting right over there that this one came out of, and I'll have minced onion next time I want to cook something. Let's get the garlic ready. So I've broken apart a head of garlic. Just wrap it to get that shell off. Don't want these minced. I don't want them diced up. Just want to get that shell off. If you're not used to working with garlic, that's all you do. You tap it, get that hard shell loose. Peel it off, and you are set to go. With all the other preparations out of the way, it's time now to get some cucumbers cut up, ready to put into the jars. One thing you should do that I neglected to do this time because we were so busy picking and we had so many of them, I didn't take the ends off. If you take the ends off before you store them, it helps keep them crisper and firmer. But I didn't do that, but these aren't too bad, and I had them in water overnight. That crisped them up a little bit. These large ones, each half I'm cutting into thirds, and they will pickle just fine. I will make jars of big ones, and I will make jars of small ones. You notice when I'm cutting, I have my fingers turned in. That way, the knife is going away from your fingers. It reduces the chance of you cutting yourself. Just a good tip if you're working with knives. We're ready to start canning. The lids and the rings are sitting in a water bath, about 180 degrees. We don't want to boil them because we could, like I said, wreck the seal on the lids or just form the rings. So they're sitting there ready to put on. When we have the jars filled, I got out 7 jars because The canner rack will hold 7 jars, so I'm not going to do any more than that in advance. So the first thing we do is we take each jar and we take some dill and just snip it off and put it in the bottom of each jar. Get that prepped and ready to go. Going to throw a little bit of onion in each one now to give it a little extra boost of flavor. And a couple of these little clove sections of garlic. The big ones I cut in half. It seems to work better if you have a couple of pieces in each jar. And the garlic is used up. And the dill. These jars out of the way. These dishes out of the way. Stray dill gathered up here. I'm going to give each jar just a little dash of the red pepper flakes. Not very much. You don't need much. The stuff is pretty potent. It just gives it a nice little added flavor. There we go. It doesn't always want to come out. And then something else that I almost forgot that I'll mention now is I put a couple of just regular black peppercorns in each one. 2 to be exact. The key is to pack the cucumbers in here as tightly as possible. So you kind of stagger them around where the cuts are. Get as many in as you can. Work them down in there really tight. That's where having different sizes comes in handy. And to look where they're getting a little off center, so you can push one in there. And a nice little small piece, get that down in there. This is where I use some of the smaller ones to fill in on the top once I can't get any more shoved down in the jar. That works out really well. Helps top it off. That's as much as I want in there. Set the cucumbers off to the side. Make sure you got it tight. Try to get as much air out of there as you possibly can. This one shoved over here. There we go. Now, another thing I forgot to mention is your filler. That's very handy. have that filler to get the liquid in there without getting it all over the lip of the jar. We'll grab the brine. We've kept that hot, but it's not boiling. You just want it hot. Remember, if it's boiling, sometimes if the jar is too cool or whatever, you can end up breaking something. Always want to be careful. Now, get your brine in there to within a ½ inch of the top of the jar, which is roughly going to be just below where the spring would go on. And in there. Now I'm going to take this wooden spoon again and I'm going to poke to make sure that everything is packed in there. Get this brine out of the way so you can see. And just a little bit more liquid in the top. There. Now we need to put a ring on here and a lid. Before you do that, grab a piece of paper towel. You know your paper toweling is clean, keep that handy. Make sure that there is no liquid at all on the top of that jar. Grab a lid. I like to just wipe the rubber seal off a little bit. Set the lid on the jar. Get the water off. Grab a ring. And tighten it down. I'm going to do the other 6 jars and then we'll go into the process of putting them into the water bath. I filled all 7 jars and I have the lids and the rings on. I've got the water bath steaming over here. We're going to set the jars in. I start in the middle to keep it balanced because this thing will tip on you. You're dealing with some pretty hot water here. Get it balanced this way, one on each side. Just keep rotating around. If you put them all on one side, you will have an issue. And you have to be sure and have one of these jar lifters if you plan to do this. The only safe way. Now, having a bad memory, I never remember exactly how much water to put into this thing to come out right, because once you lower these jars in, it's going to raise the water level. So I'm going to set this in the water bath, and I am a touch short. I need to have an inch of water over the top of these lids, so we'll grab some water here. And of course, the tap water is not warm right now. Editing this out of here. How slow can you go? There. I'm going to bring this back up to a boil now, and then we will start the timer after it reaches a boil. Brought the water to a boil. I put it on medium heat, and we will now put this in a water bath of boiling water for 15 minutes. 15-minute timer just went off. I'm going to take the lid off of here. Tricky part, got to be real careful with this because that water is hot. I'm going to go get my other little Kong. Should I have that ready? I just get a hold of this thing and pick it out of here. It's got the hooks on the side to pull it up and out. Again, be very careful. You're dealing with very hot water here. All right. Since I cool these over by the window and I'm not by the window, I have an island between me and that. I do a little transition here. And I move these to the island. And then I go from the island to the window. A little awkward, but it's the only way you can do this. Leave a little bit of space between each jar because they do have to cool. Don't let them touch. And I will have to set another towel there to get this last one on. And now they will cool. And when they are cool, they will seal by the lid just going pink. And it'll poke in, and we'll look at that a little bit later after they're sealed. It'll be a little bit before they do that. And there you have it. Dishes are all washed and drying from doing the pickles. Holding the water back because I'm going to have to do some more stuff tomorrow. And here we have 14 quarts of pickles that'll help tide us through the winter. Here we are the next morning after making 14 quarts of dill pickles. These 10 jars all seal properly. You could listen to them plink as they sealed up. The top drew down. But these two are questionable. This one on the right, I think sealed. It went down eventually. I will check it. But this one on the left did not seal, and as you can see, the fluid level is down from the brine. And what happened is there must have been a little bit of debris stuck underneath that lid when it went on. It didn't seal properly, and some of the liquid boiled out. Now, these pickles are still usable. I'm going to put a plastic lid on and put them in a refrigerator, and we're going to use them right away. They're safe to eat, but they cannot be stored. These 12 right here can be stored easily, and I'm going to be putting them in the storage room in the basement. This one we'll keep in the refrigerator too, just in case it didn't seal properly, the one on the right. So this jar that did not seal properly is a good lesson in why you have to be very, very careful when you're processing canned goods or making pickles like I did, because you leave a little bit of debris or something on that lid and then they will not seal. This is the first time I've had one not seal in a long time. And not to make excuses, but I attribute it to the fact that while I was trying to make the video, I was jumping around and I might have overlooked something sitting on either the rim of the jar or on the seal on the lid itself. So again, I guess it's a positive thing in that it's a good lesson that sometimes they will not seal if you don't do everything perfectly right. Now that the jars are all sealed and cool, the next step is to prepare them for storage down in a cool, dark storage area, and we'll do that in a little bit. And we start by taking the jar, and because we have hard water here, the boiling process usually leaves a little mineral deposit on the jar and the lid. So I wipe that off with a damp cloth, dry it a little bit, and then I can remove the ring. The ring is no longer needed on here because the jar is sealed. And I write the date the jars were canned. That was on the 16th. Set it off to the side and just keep doing that till all of these 12 good jars are processed. And then we'll take a look at how to store those. The jars have all been labeled with the date, ready to transport downstairs to storage. These two questionable jars, the one that didn't seal at all has the white cap on it, are going to go in the refrigerator and they'll get eaten first. I've placed the new jars on the shelf over to the side. They'll get used later. And then the 3 remaining jars from last year are off to this side. We'll use those up first. And I still have some old pint jars of pickles. I might make a few more of those. Those are handy if you have smaller occasions and you need some pickles for it. You want to give some to somebody to use. And then I'll be adding to the dilly beans here today, doing some canning on those because we have a lot of beans to process. Here are all the tomatoes on the shelf, a little bit of sauerkraut, and some broth that was saved from last year and canned. Now what we do, and this is a cool storage room, is just cover everything with a terry towel to help keep the light off. I'll be covering the pickles the same way, and that just helps them stay fresh longer. And that wraps up this video on how to make dill pickles. I hope you learned something about the canning process today that you will find useful, and maybe you'll want to tackle this. Remember, if you try to do canning, there are plenty of sources to tell you how to do it properly, including books from the manufacturer of these canning jars and canning lids. The main thing is to make sure everything is clean and sanitized, and don't skip any steps. You want to keep bacteria out of this. And remember, you're working with boiling water, so you need to be careful. And with that, I'm going to ask if you enjoyed this video to please subscribe and click like. Helps us out a lot. And feel free to make comments about things you'd like to see done in the future, or things you'd like to see done differently, or even let us know if you like what we're doing. So until next time, take care.